Okay, great. A very warm welcome to everyone who is joining us today for the IRMAN Talks session on policy influencing for beginners. Before we proceed, please note that this session is being recorded and will be uploaded in the IRMA Alumni YouTube channel. So first, on behalf of the IRMAN Talks team, I'm so delighted to introduce our speaker for today, Ms. Usha Mishra Hayes from PRM 19. She is an esteemed IRMA alumnus with over 25 years of global experience in strategic policymaking, with her work spanning across governments and international agencies in Asia, Africa, and Europe, including the UN, DFID, and the Oxfam. Next, it's my pleasure to welcome the session's moderator, Professor Preeti Priya ma'am, also from PRM 19. She is a respected faculty member at our alma mater, IRMA, and many of us from the younger batches, including myself actually, have had the privilege of learning from her firsthand. So a big thank you to Usha ma'am and Preeti ma'am for being here with us today. We really look forward to an engaging and insightful session. Now it's over to you, Preeti ma'am. May I request you to first please share with us a little more about Usha ma'am, and then we can dive straight into policy influence.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nivedita. Good evening, everyone. It's both an honor and a very heartfelt joy for me to introduce Usha. As someone I have known not only as an outstanding professional, but also also my classmate from our cherished days at IRMA, as Nivedita mentioned about. Right, Usha is currently the Chief of Social Policy at UNICEF China, and her career spans more than 2 decades across Asia and Africa. So I was just when I was going through her LinkedIn profile to know a little bit depth and width of her journey, what I have found that she has worked in 11 countries, including India, Bangladesh, United Kingdom, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Tanzania, Cambodia, Nepal, Ethiopia, South Africa, and now she is in China. And everywhere that she has worked in all these contexts, she has played a very pivotal role in shaping public policies, which are focused mainly on social protection, public finance, and child rights. And as always, I think and we strongly believe that Usha has done all these roles with a very sharp eye on equity and inclusion, which actually I would say that it culminated in one of her book that she wrote on social protection, lands of blossoming hope, a compelling account of her experience working to build safety nets in some of the really truly vulnerable areas. And very recently, she was invited by The Economist for their Global Business Innovation Summit, where she actually talks about that why and how it's very important to go for a principled public private partnership to deliver social good. It's also in addition to her long standing journey that she has in the development sector with UN and various other agencies, she also spent a very meaningful stint in the private sector for 2 years in India with Sahed SRAI infrastructure, where she worked on digital inclusion and rural access initiatives. To all of us who knew her as a classmate, Usha's journey, as I can now recall from our IRMA days, was always marked by her clarity of thought. She was quite determined, and she had quite deep-rooted commitment to social justice even when we were studying here at IRMA. And she has really come out exceptionally outstanding in the career that I would say she has crafted on her own terms. And it's really a big pleasure for me to welcome you, Usha, once more. I remember like in during COVID times, we had hosted you then also virtually for our students. Uh, so a very warm welcome to you, Usha, again. And today
Thank
we
you.
are now basically it's all our alums and recently graduated students, and some students will also be joining.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Preeti. And what a pleasure and what an honor. And thank you so much, Nivedita, for all your support and kind of, chasing both of us, through our busy schedule.
Yeah.
So, Preeti, sorry,
Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. Tell me, Usha.
I was just saying it's an absolute, the pleasure is absolutely reciprocal, and probably it's higher on my side, because it's great to connect not only to you but also to India. Now that I'm in China, it feels more distant than it was, say, when I was in Nepal or in Europe. So absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. So, Usha, just to start with, I think the most now the most important question that I always now I think all of us want to know is interesting. Now we have the keen interest in knowing is about your journey till date. It's the kind of width and the depth that your journey carries is really something that we would like to know, and we would like to actually understand that uh, now how have you kind of navigated your last 25 years? We would be completing 25 years this May now
Yeah.
of graduation and starting our journey after IRMA.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Preeti. Yeah, 25 years indeed. But of course, there were a couple of gaps in between, which I took for family reasons, just to put the things in perspective. And that underlines that as women, we have to kind of, really try very hard to balance work and life. And that's pretty much where I would say the journey starts. It starts as a little girl. As you grow up, you see beautiful things, but you also see the injustice, and you pick it up as when as a little toddler. And the sense of injustice and justice, and the sense of fair play was kind of, uh, pretty deeply, innately rooted in me as I was going through the cultural and the familial milieu of Bihar. And the way I would see the disparities between the treatment of my brothers and sisters, or the kind of independence my brothers would have vis-a-vis my sisters, and then it started obviously affecting me personally. So somehow I grew up kind of raising my voice against these injustices and unequal treatment, starting with the family. This is where most of the character is developed, right? It's like, it's cradle is where the character formation happens. And my father was in the administrative services. So the other side was the opportunity, while the first one I was talking was more about the challenges and the difficulties that I saw, which kind of, inspired me to become what later on I realized I was picking up. But in terms of challenges, I saw my father working tirelessly to help the poor, the underprivileged, the marginalized, whether it was a subdivisional officer or a district magistrate. Again, I saw him as a very, very upright officer, very honest. So again, that strength and grit of character and determination, and wouldn't be daunted by any of the challenges thrown at him, whether it was financial or political, right? So you pick up all this, and as you grow up, you ask yourself, okay, how do you ensure that your father kind of values you? And remember, you're again responding to the patriarchy, which is fine. I'm not critiquing it, but it's about the psychological development of a woman or a girl, which I'm kind of talking about as well. So my father definitely played a big role, as did the position vis-a-vis the rest of the society of that of my mother played a big role, right? To cut a long story short. So I took to journalism early on. I started writing even when I was in Patna Women's College as a freelancer. And because I wanted to be a journalist, I saw a journalist as the crusading one, taking up issues, shaking up the foundation. And I grew up in 70s with reverberation of the emergency, where, people were still talking about Jayaprakash Narayan and some of these very, very bold journalists who took to the prison. They would not be covered down. Those were different times, right? So that courage of the ages also kind of must have imbued in me. Um, so as I was growing up, I really wanted to be somebody like my father, rather than being an engineer or a doctor. So I wanted to be out there in the public, among the people, raising voice, addressing injustice. And of course, there's a whole journey of academic pursuits that one has to go through, which I also went through. It was split between Delhi and Patna. Ultimately, I landed doing JNU, which was again transformative. I mean, JNU today, people look at it in a slightly different way, but for me, JNU was the defining feature or defining moment. Again, it clarified and gave me the theoretical underpinning of some of these discrimination, marginalization, injustices. So it gave me the arguments, because as we know, as policy people, it's not enough just to feel. It's very important to bring the evidence and the sharper arguments. And I guess JNU helped me do that. And of course, I worked as a journalist after that, and I came to IRMA. From IRMA, the journey was straightforward, and IRMA gave me many, many practical skills, which probably JNU hadn't given. Like, for example, estimation of rate of return, which I used in my job later on. After IRMA, I joined Oxfam, after Oxfam DFID, and soon after that, I was in the UN. Now, the journey for the UN, which has been there since 2004, almost 2 decades, with a couple of interruptions where I joined also the private sector, what I would say is that it's a combination of a journey of conviction and opportunity. Conviction, which kind of was under what had been shaping for since my infancy, so to say. But opportunity is also luck, kind of a bit of a destiny, but also you're able to seize opportunity only if you're prepared for it. So I think I was spiritually, emotionally, academically, mentally prepared to make the most of the opportunity when it opened up in 2004, and so on and so forth. And after that, it's the UN, which has basically taken me from one country to the other. I've been able to keep myself inspired, although, of course, working internationally presents its own challenges. But some of these achievements that one kind of experiences in these difficult lands like Afghanistan is something which keeps you going, and you tell yourself, oh, it's worth it. When you say that you have been influencing, even if marginally, the lives of millions, you keep getting inspired and you are ready for the next stage. Thank you, Preeti. It has been a bit of a long, winding
No,
response.
not at all, not at all. I think there is more to it, but you are keeping it short given the time that we have been allotted. Uh, Usha, you have largely worked. I would like to understand that in your journey, how much has it been into field in execution, and how much it has been into like more of strategic thinking? Like, even I would remember that we always looked up to you during our 2 years at IRMA as the strategic thinker in the batch.
You're just being very kind, Preeti.
No, 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 no.
Um, I think you've caught me out there. I have been mostly doing the thinking part, but I can tell you, I have also designed pilots, and I have got them implemented. But mostly, the job has been about policy analysis, strategic thinking, national planning, and budgeting. But because you want to demonstrate the proof of concept, and you
Hmm.
want to go sometimes where nobody else has gone before in terms of the developmental sector in that particular context, and only you have the conviction, or even the resources, or the drive, or the confidence and the faith, then there's no other way but to kind of demonstrate it yourself. And of course, I mean, there's a whole theory behind piloting and modeling, and how you have to ensure that the government is also on the board. So what I would say is that it's 90-10, if I can say that split, but the 10 has been very closely related to the 90. And it is, yeah, which is strategic thinking. So you do model, you do pilot, and then ensure that kind of feeds back into the larger policy and strategic planning.
Great. So, uh, that's really important for us to know, and especially for the young Irmans who are also trying to kind of navigate, and they are interested now, as we see that more and more of Irmans are now joining. Whoever is joining in the development sector, they are actually getting into more on the development thinking part, the consulting part. So they are part of the think tank, the young ones are. So definitely they would get to understand that how it is very important to invest their time, their quality time in the field to
Yeah.
actually kind of shape the policy. So,
Yeah, sorry.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, yeah.
No,
So,
I just wanted to reinforce your point that the MBA that we did with I did with Urmol, the field work, that really was extremely insightful and useful in shaping up even my strategic thinking, because only if you understand the details you can step
right,
back and look at the big picture as well, right? And so the big picture has to be grounded on the realities of implementation and the ground truth. And you rightly said that the IRMANs are in a uniquely fortunate position to be able to connect both, because IRMA gives you the theoretical underpinning, but also gives you a hands on experience. It's a very good combination.
right. So, tell us your understanding, like now having worked for almost close to 3 decades in the policy field, uh, what is your understanding that you carry now about what we mean by this term, this policy? It
Yeah,
still
right.
kind of gives me a lot of now I get jittered by this term. What exactly we mean?
Yeah, I know. Again, I totally understand, because actually it gets
And
defined in. Sorry,
yeah,
go ahead.
and does it like now the way we read in textbooks, the way it is done in the now by UN agencies, or it is done by now in India? How do you see the differences? Where do you see the similarities? How do you kind of I really I think I have got the best opportunity today to understand policy.
Thanks again, Preeti. Just remind me, because there are a number of layers to your question. So just please feel free to come back in case I'm missing some of this. So just to simplify and demystify the whole thing
Mm.
about
Yeah,
policy, and also to remind you that I have worked in social policy, right? I'll come to that. But policy basically means, what is the government's intention, goal, and what are the measures the government is taking about it, right? So it can be a, a 5 year plan, you could say, that the government comes up, could be seen as a very good embodiment of the government's core policy. Now, what is that core policy? Is it poverty reduction? Is it economic growth? By core policy means, what is the core aim? So when you say, okay, my core aim is economic growth, or my core aim is poverty reduction, what do you then need to be doing in terms of different guidelines, different measures, actions? So this is a whole body of what needs to be done, how it should be done, how it should be evaluated, which can be seen as part of policy. So policy is really a kind of a whole life cycle. It starts with assessment, then the design, then the execution or implementation, and M&E. And I always tell my when I speak to my juniors or my staff members, and I tell them that the policy is kind of it's a behemoth, and it's not a one little thing, where you can say, oh, that's the policy. No, anything which is related to the intention of the government and executes the intention is reflective of the government's policy or what the government wants to achieve. So you will say, and many in many of the countries, in many cases, the policies are also backed by laws, but many policies are there for which there are no laws. So the best policy is which gets captured by the law, because then it is more sustainable, it is more justiciable. But even a policy without the law is good enough, because then it is it kind of, it is asking the government to do certain things. So, for example, NREGA, when it was implemented in India, it did not come out of a law. It came out of the government's policy of social protection, and then coming up with this law, sorry, coming up with this measure of the rural guarantee employment program. Now, the guarantee part was the law because it was guaranteed.
yeah,
That is very interesting. So it was a combination of policy as well as then backed by the legal aspect of the guarantee of the 100 days or the 50 days, or however it has started. So, in short, policy is, what is the intention of the government? What are the limbs, the arms, and the legs that the government has come up with, or the measures that the government has come up with? and how is it implementing it institutionally. So these were the different aspects of a policy. Now, when it comes to social policy, which is what I have been doing, the explicit aim of social policy is to kind of, ensure that there's inclusion, there is equality, there is opportunity, there is overall development, and to a certain extent, there is also poverty reduction, because which is related to the first two. If people are poor, there won't be inclusion, they would not be able to leverage the opportunities which are being opened up by the economic growth. So social policy really focuses more on, if I may say, the impact of the growth and the economic policies that the government is anyway going to have, because no government can live without revenues. They need the revenues, right? But how is the revenue going to be used in a way that enhances inclusion and makes especially the marginalized better off? That is the social part of it. Now, you wanted to understand how these are different in different contexts. I
Yes.
think that was what you were understanding.
Yes.
Yeah, so again, it can be a very, very long answer. But what I would say is that when we go into a country, we try and first and foremost understand what kind of governance it is, what are the incentives, which are the key stakeholders, and who really is the mover and the shaker. Okay. So now in countries, and I won't name the countries here, but I'll talk about regions so that I'm not in trouble. So certain parts of Africa are much more chaotic, right? There you'll see that the plus side is that you have much more leverage, because you can actually set up good policy processes from scratch. And if you have good stakeholders with you, you can also see it to fruition, because there's space for you, because nobody else is there which already has a position and is standing in opposition to you. So there, the importance of individual based allies becomes very important. Now, in certain parts of South Asia, again, this remains important, but again, one also sees the chaos of turnover, the chaos of coalition governments. There's huge amount of instability in some of the countries in South Asia where policy making becomes extremely, extremely difficult. So it's difficult to get big policy impacts, especially if you're looking for revisions. For something which is already happening for the last 10 years, it'll continue to happen. There is not much of challenge required. So you maintain those goals. Your goals would be, okay, at least can we maintain those goals? In countries like China, where I am currently, it's a much more regulated, much more disciplined, and a much more serious environment. So here, the task of policy making or policy influencing is of a different sort. Here, what we need to do is the importance of evidence and the importance of a long-term strategy becomes extremely important. And also, one has to look at innovations on the edges. By that, I meant to say you've got to be very careful about bringing up innovative ideas, which is what the government is interested in, because they are doing the traditional stuff. They know about it. The Chinese government is very interested in what is the value, what next, especially building upon what's happening in OECD countries and the better off countries. So if you can find an ally among the municipalities and the cities to do a good proof of concept, create a buzz around that, get a few more cities to go with you, and then feed it back into the national context. And if your proof of concept is great enough, if the impact is fantastic, the central government is very serious and is really looking for good answers. So in that case, it becomes challenging, but at the same time, you have more predictable way of getting a result. So it's like becomes like you in the university. If you study well, you'll get good marks. So that's why I'm really loving China right now, because the uncertainty of policy influencing is kind of less than it has been in the other
Yeah,
countries I've worked in. Yeah.
it's really interesting to know. See, one thing, it's like, because you have worked in very different countries, different continent, in fact, right? So, and mostly you have worked with UNICEF,
And
right?
WFP. I work with World Food Program, but mostly with
Okay.
UNICEF. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, how do you see now the kind of understanding that we have about how UNICEF works in India, or the kind of work profile that they have provided to airmen who were now recruited from directly immediately after their graduation, right? So what we understand now, they're kind of now they're more working with the district administration level, and more like consultant to the government.
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
so I'm interested in knowing that how does this happen in other countries, right? So how does UNICEF kind of determine in terms of which policy, or how to kind of deal with, how do you kind of get this knack of dealing with different kind of government and still managing your overall agenda that you have on the child protection, child well-being?
Yeah. So
So what kind of training you people get while in the job, or is it more they have the great people working with them who are on their own, they are running some kind of moving some kind of magical wand and getting things done?
thanks. I mean, I would like to believe that, but just to say that you're quite right that UN does not take freshers. It typically takes people with experience, at least 3 to 4 years of experience, and that is where that experience, when they go and act as a consultant, say for the district administration, becomes extremely useful. So what you just mentioned as a consultant to district administration is what we call as technical assistance. So in context like say in Gujarat, where Gujarat does not need UNICEF for food distribution or does not need WFP because they're not really battling with hunger and drought. They're capable of managing all that themselves. They will need international agency time and again. For example, if there's a major disaster, then obviously probably they're going to call for assistance. But for the regular social protection program, Gujarat and the government of India has its own massive portfolios. So what are they going to need agencies like UNICEF or World Food Program or Oxfam is to help the policies, their programs better. Now you can define better in so many different ways, and this is where UNICEF comes in to even help them define. Typically, governments, especially if they are democratic governments, in case of India, they are interested in the votes, right? So the votes would be if the poor people are voting for them, they want their programs to benefit the poor people, and that's your strategy of advocacy. When we do advocacy, we always try and see how do you align yourself with the political incentives of the policymakers, and your messaging again will start looking into, it's okay, impact on poor, impact on families, which again vote for, impact on growth, which is something again the governments are really interested in. So UNICEF, at the heart of UNICEF is of course child rights, but we always, as far as I can tell you, social policy, we always link it up with the larger agenda of growth, inclusive growth, sustainable growth, the state citizen contract, which again is something that is very important to the governments. This means that in a context like, for example, in Afghanistan, I mean, it's an old story because now Afghanistan is a totally different context. But when we were in Afghanistan and you're focused on state building, which is stabilization, right? Then you will be focused on social contract, because if you give something to the citizens, the credibility and the legitimacy of the state is strengthened. So different context will provide you needs to provide you with different set of arguments and positioning. Now let's talk of China. The China is about, I have moved away from well-being because China has eradicated poverty. So one of the first things that I did when I came to China was I said, we are obviously not talking about poverty, but hey, we can talk about child well-being. And when you talk of child well-being, let's compare that with OECD countries because you want to raise the bar. So the whole conversation, which I've not done in any other country. So you come to a country, you realize what is going to resonate most, what is going to be sounding as a bit challenging, not derogatory, but a bit challenging. So it's very important. It's a thin line. So one has to kind of craft that. And you test the waters as well. So I tested the water in a few meetings, etc. And then kind of we took it on. So in China, it's about human capital. It's about comparison with the OECD countries. It's about global competitiveness, right? It's about global competitiveness economically, but also technologically. So if you are competing for global supremacy in the STEM, what do you need? You want to invest in human capital. This means you want to invest in children. So there's a whole causality analysis and a theory of change that you come up with, and you kind of, push it back to the government. Yeah.
See how free UN agencies feel when they're working in countries, because what, like, I also see one long question by Depinder, who's actually now something which is also like I had in my mind, like increasingly he's saying that the government of India, or and I'm sure many other countries also would be doing that, that they would like these agencies, UNICEF or other UN organizations, to endorse what the government is doing, not necessarily coming up with the reports that show deficiencies. Even like in many of our impact evaluation studies that we do at IRMA, or
Yeah.
various other work that we do for the government, we also
Mm.
do face such issues that they don't really want to come up with reports which show deficiencies, or there have been instances where I think the faculty team which is working on such reports would be kind of put on pressure to kind of change it or fine tune, now do some kind of a modification there. So, like, how difficult do you see or have you experienced, and if you can little bit talk something more about that, how do
Yeah.
you navigate such difficulties?
Yeah, totally. And this is just the reality of the day in any context that you work in. And some governments are more sensitive than the others. Some governments are more controlling than the others. One of the most open government that I've ever worked with was in Nepal. Now, you can explain that in different ways. One could be that maybe they probably were too distracted, or it just has remained a very open country. The media is still very open and critical of the government, and there are multiple sides. So I didn't face much of difficulty there. Similarly, Tanzania was very open, while Ethiopia was very different, and we know the political history of Ethiopia. So totally, and I've worked in countries like Cambodia, now in China. So I've worked again in countries ranging from where the space has been pretty plentiful to the spaces where it's more constrained. Now, one has to keep in mind that when we talk about policy influencing, there's a whole ecosystem. And there
Hmm.
is just not one thing that we are trying to do. And that's why it's very important that one needs to also have a very strategic approach to the policy goal. So we need to be clear, okay, we are trying to achieve this through the causality analysis, to the theory of change, and then come up with your programs and your measures. So that program and those measures and those causality analysis, theory of change, the identification of stakeholders, your allies, and everything is part of the ecosystem. Now, we leverage the ecosystem in such a way that all the difficult advocacy is not only done by the UN or publicly, just it's not possible, because you want to remain there and still continue to do your work. So many a time when the data has been the difficult one, and it has happened in India as well as the other countries, we have been forced to pull out the data, but we still have used those findings in our meetings when it is happening, and we say, okay, fine, but there is a challenge there. It's an issue of the numbers. Okay, we'll not talk of the numbers, but the issue is still there. So you might kind of, uh, you might haggle around the levels of malnutrition and the wasting and stunting in India, but you
Yeah.
cannot haggle around the fact that when you go to the rural parts of India, you will find many children who are malnourished and they have pot bellies and they're underweight and all that stuff. So focus on the issue. So the UN does not do advocacy really, say, as an Oxfam one, right? So it's a very different way, or how a local NGO will be able to do, which can go out in the streets and stuff. But
Hmm.
UN does support these partners, which is part of the ecosystem. So you will be very clear that, okay, I'll be able to work with civil society organizations, and maybe we have this project which brings out these issues. But if our research and evidence comes out and the government is not very keen, we'll have to withdraw that data. But there are other sorts and other channels through which we have to continue to talk about the issue and also remind the government of the data. So we don't stop talking, but the channels through which we talk is not necessarily something which is very publicly available or visible. So one has to keep that in mind. Sometimes there have been cases, Preeti, where the RC, which is the highest UN official in any country, resident coordinator, has had to take a stance, for example, in Myanmar, and they had to be kicked out. Or it happened even in case of UNICEF, it happened in Ethiopia, where our UNICEF representative, she took a stance and she was kicked out. So you're always weighing the risk, but there are certain risks which are just not worth the compromise on the principles, and then take a calculated risk of, hang on, this is my bottom line, and I won't go beyond that. So there are different actions taken in different contexts.
That's really, yeah, I can understand that how not necessarily everywhere it's quite a very smooth process. And as you're talking about that, some of your colleagues had to be kind of quickly move out of the country because of the kind of work they wanted to do and what the government isn't, how the government is cooperating with them on that.
I'll give another example where governments necessarily don't like evaluation, especially independent evaluation. And it took me 1 year in a particular country just for the government to agree with the TOR. But I really wanted the government's engagement, because they may not rubbish in the sense that they may not agree for the publication of the evaluation report, but at least through the engagement with the process, they will know what was data coming. And since it's their own process and they have been engaged, they will also know that this was a robust process. They may not want the data to go out publicly ultimately, but even for their own internal information. So we do have to keep in mind and sometimes we ask our consultants to give us 2 reports, and sometimes we do 2 reports as well. One which is confidential and goes directly to the government, it's not for public consumption. That's also one of the strategies that the UN uses. So it took me 1 year just to agree the TOR, and finally the process got started, and it was an evaluation of their social protection portfolio. So governments can be very, very queasy about independent evaluation of the policy measures.
Yeah, but in India, I believe that almost all the projects are getting evaluated.
Yes.
Now, the truth of the evaluation or the kind of integrity that evaluators are exhibiting there is, I'm not like, it's better not to comment on that, but yeah, everything is getting evaluated.
But my emphasis was on independent. Remember, it's UNICEF, and it is UNICEF evaluating it. That's why the government was more nervous. Yeah, definitely. But these are the kind of things that you do. I mean, you're asking about how do you do policy influencing. So this was a strategic approach to getting the social protection landscape reformed. So you start with the evidence, but the evidence which is generated in partnership with the government. It's a very technocratic approach, but sometimes only political approaches are not enough. So you have to take a technocratic approach as well, evidence, feed it back, and continue the political approach at the same time. Yeah.
So, Usha, you have worked in diverse contexts, several countries, right? And you have worked on, I'm sure you have worked on several policies. If I have to kind of, now, if you have to call out one policy uh, uh, that you actually feel really very proud of in terms of influencing now and giving a very large, a very meaningful impact for on the group that you were actually interested in, which one that would be? Though I understand that maybe you are in now, your Nepal stint was really great. You found a lot of, it's like, Usha, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here.
Yeah,
Can you
okay,
see me?
yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. So now that's something if one or two that you would like to talk to us
Yeah,
about such
thanks. Absolutely. In fact,
interventions.
I would, yeah, it's very interesting because um, although I have worked mostly at the country office level, but what happened when I was in Cambodia, I got a chance actually to work at the regional level, at the ASEAN level, because Cambodia became the chair of ASEAN. And it
Okay.
was a very fortuitous, and I write about that in my book as well, where I thought of the same thing while the minister was thinking as well, and the World Bank and UNDP kind of, they all rallied along. So we said, okay, now how do we maximize and leverage the opportunity of Cambodia becoming the chair of ASEAN? ASEAN is Association for Southeast Asian Nations with their 11 members: Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, Cambodia, Laos, Timor-Leste, Vietnam, and all that, Philippines, exactly. So in the Southeast Asia. So, we came up with an ASEAN social protection framework, and that pretty much set the tone for many of the policy measures which are still being implemented. And this happened in 2013, for which I was fortunate enough to be knighted by the government of Cambodia. They really recognized that. So, you would say, theoretically speaking, probably that was one of the most impactful, and also in terms of influence and also being awarded. But it's the funny thing is that something which I really draw immense satisfaction from, and it goes back to the point that you're making earlier about small scale project, getting the feel of what it is like, is what I achieved and what I did in Nepal, which was not so much of big policy bank kind of an impact, but a small project as a part of innovation, because I do try and bring an innovation in every country that I go, the proof of concept, which I implemented in Nepal. So we brought in what is called the 3D printed prosthetics. And this was the first UNICEF country office, in partnership with the health ministry and the private sector, which was from Belgium, Ogani. And I had to can't tell you the processes and the hoops that I had to go through to be able to establish that partnership between Belgium, private sector, the government of Nepal, and obviously UNICEF headquarters and the country office, where finally we were able to, print off prosthetics, which were damn cheap, using a 3D printer, and get them fitted over those who had just recently been affected by the earthquake, or they had a chronic loss of the limbs, amputation, and that. And that program has picked up 50 children and adults were benefited from that small little pilot, but now it's getting scaled up. But somehow that gives me so much of satisfaction, because it makes me feel that if we hadn't thought of that program, those 50 people, and 25 or 30 of them hadn't used any prosthetics. They, can you imagine, they have been living with that disability and dysfunctionality for so many years, and there was no help available, and here we come. So that has been the most heartwarming experience, kind of, achievement for me, small scale, but something that I could see with my I could see the immediate impact.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. I think working with people with disabilities and working for them has its own
Yeah.
value,
Yeah.
and definitely there is a very deep impact even on ourselves. When I happen to kind of now work uh, with farmers with disability in Gorakhpur.
Yeah.
And now I was doing a work for an FPO where the FPO members, the Farmers Producers Organization members, are the farmers with disabilities. So there is an organization which is working primarily with them with funding from CBN. So
Right.
that's really so.
Yeah. So you can relate to that, right? So
Yes,
it's
yes,
a different kind of emotional experience. It's a different kind of a satisfaction.
absolutely.
And
Because there was like no, they were all like they were trying to kind of modify the tools. A very simple tool like Khurpi for weeding,
yeah,
which
yeah,
now which a person with now amputated limb cannot use. So how to
yeah,
kind of do it? All that was really like
yeah,
even for a lot of uh, research consulting assignment that I have done in IRMA as a faculty member. That's one a very small project, but it
yeah.
had a very deep impact on me.
Right.
Correct.
I'm glad we kind of had similar experiences. And because I was telling myself, am I being too mushy? No, I said no. I just felt overwhelmed when I finally got the report when I was in China. Yeah, it's satisfying, deeply satisfying.
Uh, Usha, I would like to take a detour now from your work and policy and etc. And I would really like to know more about you as an author.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
Even I would say that we were always charmed by your language skills, now your deep knowledge about the literature, And I still remember that we'll sit with you and would like to kind of now talk to you about all these. And now, as I see that yes, you have already written a book, you are also writing novels, and there are many unpublished and already novels are there with you. It's only the matter of so. Just give us also some insights. Can we peep into Usha as an author?
Thanks, Preeti. It's a very this is a very personal and kind of an emotional question as well, because my father was a great writer, and I unfortunately we lost him about 4 years back. And so I've been deeply impressed with him. So along with his handling the responsibilities of bureaucracy, he kept on writing books, and he wrote more than 100 books, and fantastic books. Coming from Bihar, being able to make an impression on the national Hindi landscape is not easy, and coming also from a poor family. So we our grandfather was what was he? He was basically head of a post office with very meager salary, and we didn't have a lot of land. So, finances were always an issue. And my grandfather wanted my father to become a postman, and he would be very happy just him becoming a postman. But my father, no, he said, no way, I'm going to. So the whole battle for his own education, and then, for establish. So it's a very personal journey in that sense. So I've grown up surrounded by by discussion around literature, and seeing my father always having a book in his hand. So I started writing, actually. As I said, I took to journalism and freelancing when I was in undergrad. But even when I was in school, I wrote plays. When I was in Notre Dame, for example, I wrote a play, and it was about independence movement. And I was in fifth standard at that time. I wrote, directed it, and performed it. So I directed other girls to perform in it. And my principal, she came up to the stage and she said she couldn't believe it was written by me. Now I look back and I think maybe I should have taken full time to writing. But it never happens, because you're also worried about your other needs of life. In India, doesn't necessarily allow you to become a writer straight away. So then I took on to journalism, and then I started working on my novel, which is the one you were talking about earlier. When I was in 20s, early 20s, the first draft was written then, and then I kept on working on it. So different phases of my life in 30s and 40s gave me different layers. So that story is very multi-layered, although at the heart of it is a story of a girl struggling to defy some of these very constraining and restrictive gender social environment for a young girl in Bihar. So perhaps many of the students probably would not be able to identify themselves with that. Maybe villages in Bihar are still that restrictive, but towns definitely are no longer that kind. But I grew up in a very, very conservative environment with steep differences across and practice differences across the way the kind of independence a man had or a boy had vis-a-vis a girl, or the kind of expectations or even the language which got used, without going into the details. So, um, so that's the journey of starting. It was really a survivor's fight. I wanted it all to be out, because otherwise probably I would have gone crazy, because the pressure, the mental pressure. And when you're young, you feel so much, and you
Yes.
you which is it needs a channel. And so for me, it was a way of keeping my sanity. And I also obviously had my studies to complete, and after that, of course, I have worked on two or more scripts, and I love writing. The happiest I feel is when I'm writing and it's in a flow, and I try and be as genuine as possible. I've also written technical books, the one on social protection you mentioned earlier, and currently I'm working on a book in China, which has its own value, I believe. But it's really, you are most honest when you're writing the creative books, because that's where you're able to seamlessly bring in your personal experience with the larger issues. So you look at one to kind of magnify it across the canvas.
We will look forward to your book on China, Usha, because China, for many of us, remains an enigma. We keep on, like, we understand China very differently, but now, and someone who's actually living in China, working with government, and now working on issues related to children, etc. So it's going to really, like, we would look forward to kind of having your book, and we'll definitely like order that book for our IRMA library.
Thank you.
Ah,
Absolutely.
so
It helps to have a friend with the IRMA, right? In the faculty. Okay, thanks. Yeah.
So I would like the the fellow Irmans to feel free. They can unmute, and if they have questions for Usha, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. I won't like to come between you and Usha for that.
Ma'am Nivedita here.
Yeah.
Hello,
Yeah.
this is Chidambaram. Uh, okay, I have many questions. Of course, I will ask one by one, giving chances to others. And basically, if UN organization is advocating something, it's always perceived that it is a UN organization is a mouthpiece of US views. So, how do you handle that? Number two is how you use the media to take up the things that amendments or policy making that you want to make in that particular country. Okay, these are the two questions, and later on I will give chances to other people and then come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. To your first question, the UN is a very diverse beast. There are certain parts of the UN which are more political. So, for example, the General Secretariat, the General Assembly, the Security Council, the peacekeeping, all that is quite political straight away. No doubts about that. But there are developmental arms of the UN, which people who will understand that it is far less political. Now, UNICEF is not necessarily seen, I believe, as really political because we don't really deal with political issues. Now, UNDP deals with election and stuff like that. They get into the capacity building and they work with the EU to kind of, even observe and monitor the election. So sometimes UNDP lands itself in hot water because of exactly the issues that you have mentioned, that is a political leaning. But frankly speaking, most of the developmental arms of the UN, we're really guided by our core mandates, whether it is on gender or food security or child rights or governance or just sustainable development or climate or whatever it is. And many of the UN agencies are not really headed by the US, by the way, right? So UNICEF and WFP are headed by USA executive directors. So one would say, is UNICEF touting the line of USA? I would say that many of the policies that UNICEF is actually implementing are not even available in the USA. So we ask for universal child benefits, which is not there in the US. US doesn't have universal child rights. The Europe has. So some of the standards that we try and promote are actually European standards and European positions and experiences. So that misconception definitely is a barrier. You're right in that sense. And that is why it's very important for the UN to be seen as approachable in the countries that they work for, to have these connections, as you rightly mentioned, with the media. And UNICEF works very closely with the media. We have a very strong communication and advocacy arm in every country that we work in. In fact, UNICEF is one of the most media savvy, most media friendly, and most media invested UN agency, absolutely central to its advocacy, to its information sharing, to its mobilization, whether it is mobilization of the opinion or resources. Um, on difficult issues, as I had mentioned earlier, where we are seen as, okay, we are not being independent, or although I in the working of the UNICEF, there is nothing like we don't take political positions. So, for example, it is the principle of humanitarian neutrality. So, if there is a humanitarian conflict, it doesn't matter which side the vulnerable population is on. It's absolutely everybody's equal for us. Those principles kind of defend us. So, the normative framework of the way UNICEF works and the different UN agencies work definitely come to shield us from political interference and political alliances. There are obviously difficult situations. Sometimes we are not seen as vocal. So, for example, in the case of Palestine, many, the criticism against some of the UN agencies has been that it hasn't been vocal enough. But even when we are not vocal, there's a lot of advocacy which is behind the door. But also, to be frank, to be fair, and to be ultimately saying that, yes, the leadership at the top also matters. It does determine to the extent that we could be vocal or even be critical even internally. Now, in terms of geopolitics, so for example, between America and China, so some of the things that we are able to do or not able to do for China, within China, are definitely also influenced by some of these geopolitical considerations. That's just the reality.
Ma'am, one
Anybody else?
question
Yeah.
from given the current situation in Afghanistan, and I remember you mentioned Afghanistan during the discussions as well, what role do you foresee the event playing in restoring and perhaps securing for good the rights of women and children in that area?
Afghanistan is a bit of a sad story. And I was there twice in 15, 16, when the hopes were still alive in terms of equality of rights for girls and women. It was a much more dangerous place, but it was a more hopeful place. And I went there. I was asked to go there back again after the Taliban had taken over, which was in early 22. And the place was safer. The protection was provided by the Taliban. There was no fighting. We could go to any district, any part of Afghanistan, but it was a much more depressing and depressed place because there's a clampdown on even basic access to education for girls beyond the age of 12, and women's rights were being gradually stripped off. So, unfortunately, in circumstances like this, you can continue to advocate for rights and equality, and which we do. So we haven't given up on the advocacy. But the question is, should we pull out of Afghanistan? And these are the questions which we had to go through. There was a number of town hall meetings where we had to ask ourselves, okay, now this is violation. What should we do? Should we pull out? And we always arrived at this that, okay, let's do the best we can. Let's at least save those who can be saved and be there and to continue to be the voice of reason. If we pull out, we don't have any leverage. If we are there, we'll at least continue to have leverage and continue to be an honest broker. So we never compromised on our position. But at the same time, I don't think the progress has been that great.
Understood. Thank you.
Usha, you spoke about the NREGA Act, the NREGA scheme. So, as a policy expert, I have a question for you. The government of India developed it and proposed it as a sort of safety net for the poor, those who don't have skills. Now, when the government of India gives money under NREGA to the states are interested in the money, but they are not so much, concerned about the accountability, the transparency, all these aspects. So, as a policy expert, how would you rework NREGA so that it becomes more effective?
This feels like an interview question. It is. I mean, if we really want to have a serious discussion around NREGA, it probably needs much more time. But and NREGA or NREGA has a checkered result across India. Some states have done better than the others, and we have seen that some states where the overall governance is already good, there the program has flourished and has been able to achieve both individual transformation as well as the community transformation, including that of the environment. So it is very clear that overall it's about the governance. Now, in terms of the design of the NREGA itself, all the necessary elements are there. You have social audits, you have monitoring and evaluation, you have you obviously have good reporting system, because the World Bank invested in this, so there have been number of evaluations of that. So where it goes wrong is in the states where the governance is overall weak. How do we solve the problems of poor governance? I think it is a much bigger issue and goes beyond MNREGA. Typically, the advocacy is all around how do we ensure the participation of citizens and citizens' education. Uh, Now, different agencies work in citizens' education. There are different NGOs which are working there. UNICEF also plays some role. UNDP plays a bigger role in that, and it's a multi-layered, a very stacked policy process, which ultimately might result into improving the implementation and the outcome of any public policy measure or public program. But I would not throw away the whole of MNREGA, although I must say I don't know what is happening at this point of time. But 4 years back, 5 years back, when I had looked at the reports, there's some states which were doing pretty okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Nivedita, would you like us to conclude now?
Yes, unless there are
So,
any further
Sorry, one more question is there.
Okay.
Yeah. So, how research? Do you do some research? Because there are two aspects. One is to policy formulation stage, and another is amending a policy which has gone wrong. So both ways, you need some research to back up what you are doing, advocacy. So how this is done? Do you do that, or how do you take up this policy changes?
You're absolutely right. And the research has to be there, and it can be there throughout the life cycle of the policy. So the formulation itself could be supported by a research, which is understanding why this issue is, what is driving it, what exactly is the issue, what exactly is the impact, and how is the impact differential for different parts of the society or different parts of the country. So very much, evidence-based policy formulation, but also as the policy is being implemented, what we call is process research. So, how is it really reaching people? What are the challenges? What are the transaction costs that community is facing? So, the implementation policy research is also very important. And then, what is obviously look at the impact, whether it had its intended impact. So there are different researches required for different parts of the life cycle, and it all depends upon what are we changing. Sometimes the policy is great, the policy is already there, you don't necessarily want to do a kind of a formative research, or you're not looking at a situation assessment research, but you're focused on the impact research or the implementation research. But when one is doing an impact research or a policy or an implementation research, one has to understand as to what the issue is, what are the drivers of the issue. So many of the research pieces do end up answering the fundamental issue of what is the fundamental problem, what are the drivers, who are the stakeholders, and so on and so forth. As far as UNICEF is concerned, or the UN is concerned, the mega research that we do, which is what is required for mega policy changes, are done by commissioning professional teams. And it typically lasts from 3 months to a year. We make it a point to, and if you're doing it well, we make it a point to involve the government. The government really needs to be part of the research. TOR engaged in inception report, drafting, and all that stuff, because there's an ownership. There is some other policy pieces that we produce which are more quick and are in-house generated. And I do lots of that because it's supposed to be influencing topical policy moments. So the aim of this policy piece is to gather quickly whatever is there and to make arguments which are based on the evidence and point it out. So it's for the policymakers digest, but in a very timely fashion, you are able to strengthen your advocacy. And these policy pieces are very, very important. Otherwise, you're kind of seen to be thinking and talking from thin air. So these policy pieces give you that gravitas and ready to use evidence, which is used also by the different UN agencies. We come together. If it is a big issue, we try and sing from the same song sheet, as we call it. So the big research, yes, commissioned independently, but the quick in-house research is more about kind of a meta-analysis or a meta-synthesis of existing literature and evidence.
Anyone else? Usha, one last question from my side. How are you now experiencing invasion of AI in policy making?
I'm actually very enthusiastic about it, and I'm encouraging it. And it has made the whole task of, for example, research so much easier.
Easier.
Absolutely. This means evidence generation, evidence synthesis, evidence compilation is so much easier than, say, what used to take us months earlier or weeks. You can produce that in a couple of hours or less, using deep search, for example. So this means that the demand from us, the expectation from policymakers is higher, because this means you should be then able to identify these policy moments. You should be able to scan the environment very quickly and say, hey, this needs to be slightly tweaked. And by policy influencing, it's not always the big mega moment. It's always the slight tweaking. So, for example, if the national insurance policy is being devised, or people are thinking of maternity insurance as they are in China, then make it a point to talk also about the maternity insurance for the migrants, the portability of the maternity insurance, or those who are a part of the gig economy, issues like that. So I do think that, and in fact, it's quite an interesting question that you asked, because right now in China, I'm really interested in what is called um, agentic AI, and by basically having an agent assistant. So imagine having an agentic AI for a family in a remote village in, say, Kunming or Yunnan province, or say in one of the Bastar or Buxar districts in Bihar, where it's difficult to travel to district office. The family may not have the literacy or the confidence or the agency, but they're all using smartphones, as you can see. How many reels are being produced from far off places,
Yeah.
and there is an assistant which works with them, which identifies their situation. They said, okay, these are the schemes you're eligible for, and I can even make the application on your behalf, because vulnerable families, poor families, find it absolutely tedious to make these applications. They just don't have the confidence. So I'm actually very enthusiastically exploring the possibility of developing an agentic AI. And this is again the realm of innovation, which is very important for social policy. So I'm quite excited by that, Preeti.
Yeah. Good. That's actually revolutionizing every space, Even in academia, we are looking at that how a lot of various, not very mundane things that we had to spend a lot of time is actually, we are
I know.
we are more efficient. At the same time, I would say that yes, a lot of now we are actually focusing more on. It's not a over dependence on that. But
That's
yes,
true.
we are able to do a lot of higher order work because now a lot of plain work, simple work, or a lot of time consuming work is we are able to do it there.
Absolutely. I was looking at a research which we have commissioned. This is a Paris-based company, and they obviously are using AI, and they had looked through 8,000 documents in 2 months. Do you think that's possible? It's not humanly possible. So, in fact, I tell my team, because see, when in UNICEF, you're not being tested once you have the job. You're not being tested for how you write, which is the kind of skill that your students are developing, which is important. So they can't be using generative AI to write their tests or write their tutorials. But in with my team, I have basically said, use your AI for producing your first draft. Go through it, contextualize it. Don't be shy of using AI. I'm encouraging my team to do that. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Usha. Thank you so much. Does it feel like that we have been, and as CT is writing in the chat box that it should have been longer. It should have more time that is writing. So I do feel so. But yes,
Thanks to you and thanks to everyone. Thank you. This has been, I really enjoyed chatting, I must say. It didn't feel like a chore at all. I was just reflecting with you, and it's such a great thing to talk to a friend after ages. After ages, yeah.
so whenever next time you are in India, you must tell us. You must tell us so that we must get you on the campus. So
Yes, I
maybe
will
when
certainly.
you come, it won't necessarily be the IRMA campus. As you know, we have now transformed into a university, and
Right.
very soon a lot of identity markers that we have as IRMA,
Yeah,
IRMA as an institution is going to be different.
yeah.
They may not be
Yeah.
there, but still the soul of IRMA would be there, and I would love to connect with that soul.
Absolutely.
Thank
And you are there,
you.
Preeti. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a great incentive to me.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
And thanks to everyone who joined in. And thanks for the brilliant questions. Thanks, Nivedita, for organizing all this.
Thank you so much, ma'am, to both of you. This was such an immersive session with so much to learn from. I think time just flew with this session. On that note, on behalf of the entire IRMAN Talks team, I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to Ms. Usha Mishra Hayes for a truly, truly insightful session today. Uh, your clarity, your depth of experience, and the ability to break down the very complex world of policy making, policy influencing has given us surely a lot to reflect on. A very sincere thank you to Professor Preeti Priya ma'am as well. Your expert moderation really helped to create a rich and engaging conversation that made this session all the more meaningful. And lastly, to everyone who joined us today, thank you so much for being with us. These conversations only become richer because of the collective energy that we all bring to the table. Once again, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Nivedita. Thank you. Bye.
Ma'am, uh, I'm sorry to just pitch in a question the very last moment because we have been traveling and I did not get a chance to speak up between. Ma'am, actually, I'm a consultant and I am actually looking to enter into organizations like UNDP and UNICEF. So, since I've already seen the implementation side of projects and how things work on the government level, like how the bids work, how the system works. I just wanted to know what are the scope for people like professionals like me and others who might not directly be in the development field right now. Like, um, what are the ways for us to contribute in the policy making process? I'm very sorry to ask you this at the very last moment.
No, it's fine. If I
Usha,
may.
Usha, I would just like to give you like Pranjali is a young graduate. I think she's from PRM 41. Pranjali, if I'm not wrong.
Yes, ma'am. I'm
And
from PR 40.
she started her career after IRMA with Grant Thornton. And I am aware of that she's doing really, really very good work at the ground level. And many of her other batchmates are also, like I'm aware, like Sanjeev, who is working in Jharkhand, again with GT. So thank you, Pranjali, and I'm sure, like Usha, uh, you do inspire these people, and I would request you to mentor some of them to kind of take their journey ahead.
Absolutely, I'm very happy to mentor them. Absolutely, Preeti, and that's my offer. And just to quickly get back to the question as well, I think do gather some more experience with the not for profit sector, because typically people who join the UN come from NGOs or funds or those who have been working on the grassroots level. So you're doing the right thing, but gather a bit of more experience. If you're looking at fresh entries in the UN, then there are a few schemes that you should be aware of. One is called NATI, which is New Emerging Talent Initiative of UNICEF. The other is UNV, United Nations Volunteer Program. The third is YPP, Young Professionals Program, which is a UN-wide YPP. So do be aware. I'm saying this because many people are not aware and they don't register and they don't explore. So do have this research done. But getting into the UN is a kind of a long term. Have a long-term strategy rather than immediate strategy. If you're interested in research, of course, there are many research agencies which end up working and doing research for UNICEF or UN, like JPAL. It's a very good example. There might be other research institutions in India, but not much comes to mind. OPM is an international Oxford Policy Management. It must have a branch in. So that's another route through which you become closer to the UN. So think about diversifying your strategy. But frankly speaking, can I say, and I just want to remind, it's conviction plus opportunity. So if you're clear, this is where you want to go. And UN is basically, for us, it's a symbol of being able to do the development sector work at the highest levels. That's what it is, right? So continue to excel in your work and have the conviction and have the vision and the dream. But what you're doing, excel on that. And everything and whatever best will happen for you will come to you. You will always, if you search, if you pursue excellence, great things will happen. Frankly, I didn't plan to join the UN. When I was growing up, I was studying, how it is in Bihar, how you can think of medicine and engineering and civil services, but it just seemed to happen, and it clearly was my destiny because I've been there for the now 25 years. So what I'm saying is that focus on what you're doing, excel in that, but explore what are the different channels. Mentoring, of course, I'm very happy to do that. uh, get yourself registered also on some of these websites. So there's UN Careers website. Please put yourself up on the roster there. The YPP, NATI initiatives, UNV, etc.
Thank you so much, ma'am. That was valuable advice. We will keep on looking for such opportunities because YPP, I felt that when I was applying for that, I think it had an age limit and all that. So I was looking for other ways because short-term consultancy programs are there, and maybe it might be easy for some people to get in and some people it's really hard. So I'll keep doing that. I'll keep trying my best there. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you. All the best.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Usha.
Thank you so much, Preeti, again.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
We'll stay in touch.
Sure.